Hello. Depa Billaba was a ranking member on the High Council when Anakin joined the Jedi Order. So what if Depa Billaba trained Anakin Skywalker? Would he still fall to the dark side, or would she give him the maternal love he needed? Special thanks to Art Sabers for sponsoring our 75,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. All the details in the pinned comment down below. You didn't see that. Our story begins in the High Council chambers. The Council had just returned from Naboo. The topic of today's discussion was the return of the Sith, and which was likely killed by Jedi Padawan, now Master Kenobi. Mace and Yoda weren't sure if it was the Master or the apprentice that was killed. They obviously hoped that it was the Master, but the Jedi knew that it was highly unlikely that, despite his skill, Kenobi would have been able to best a Sith Lord. The chances are that he killed a highly trained apprentice, but who knows? It's possible that Maul was the Dark Lord of the Sith because, after all, he did kill Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn. This did lead into another conversation, firstly about stepping down of Master Yaddle from the High Council, and then after that, of course, the disappearance of Yaddle and Dooku. It was a weird series of events. First the funeral on Naboo, then they got back to Coruscant. Yaddle stepped down from the council. Next thing they knew, Dooku and Yaddle were missing. There was a lot of fear for what could have happened to the two of them, especially as Dooku was Yoda's final student, and it didn't exactly look good or like the best reflection for Yoda. The conversation drifted from topic to topic. Two of the more quiet members on the council sat across the room from each other. Plo Koon sat nearest the door, on Yoda and Windu's left. Across from him in the middle of the room next to Eth Koth was Jedi Master Depa Billaba. She was Mace's last student, and she became a council member relatively quickly. Windu was proud of who she became. Depa and Plo had talked before this current session started. It was a divisive topic amongst the council, but Depa and Poe were two of the members who supported Skywalker's acceptance into the Jedi Order. Depa questioned Plo about Anakin and why he voted to allow Skywalker into the Order. Plo's simple but true response was that he believed in Anakin's ability to grow beyond what the council expected of him. Plo had a similar vision to what Qui-Gon expected and had about the boy, but he remained silent about it, trusting the wisdom of the council and trusting that it would be right. But as of lately, that was less and less frequent in Plo's own mind. This was a similar phenomenon for Depa. She trusted the will and the wisdom of the council, only to be disappointed over and over again. Sometimes she believed her master would make the right decision, but he seemed to favor the status quo, which currently wasn't the worst thing for the Jedi, considering it kept them as a well-liked group within the Republic. Plo and Depa's conversation eventually evolved to Depa suggesting Plo request Yoda to step down from the High Council and allow Plo to become the Grand Master. Plo was very adamant that he didn't want to partake in such actions, believing that it should be a natural succession, one that was consecrated by the will of the council, not by his own decision. He trusted Yoda, and he had no reason to want to take away from him what power he had. While both Depa and Plo agreed that Yoda, after so many years being the Grand Master, had become relatively complacent, Depa understood why Plo didn't want to do what she suggested. Their conversation did transfer over to the questions about Skywalker and whether or not they should do something about him. Depa personally wanted to train him, but it had been centuries since a student had multiple teachers, aside from the instructors in the lower levels of the Jedi younglings. Plo understood where she was coming from, but he told her to trust the will of the Force. If she believed the Force was guiding her to act, then she should, and inevitably would, though that decision remained up to her to make. When the current session came to a close, the council dispersed. The Grand Master and the Master of the Order always waited behind just in case there were any individuals that had questions, concerns, or topics they wanted to cover when the council finished its work. Plo saw Depa sitting steadily, and knew what she was doing, and gave her a nod before abandoning the chambers. Typically, he was the last one to leave aside from the Grand Master and the Master of the Order. When all were gone, Depa told the two Masters that she would like to try and oversee the training of Anakin Skywalker. She didn't want to completely kick Obi-Wan off of his training, but she believed that an experienced Master should be present, and without Kenobi being experienced, it could become a failed experiment, if you will. The two looked at each other before Mace asked his former student why she wanted to do this, and she simply told him that the Force was guiding her to do it. He couldn't necessarily disprove of this statement from her, so he obliged, and told Yoda that he personally was okay with it as long as Yoda was. Since Mace trusted his former student and Yoda trusted Mace, he couldn't really disagree. It would make sense to have a council member assist Skywalker with his training, so it was agreed that Depa would have permission. She was a council member after all, so she could start whenever she decided was necessary for herself. She started immediately. She found Obi-Wan in the archives. He'd essentially hadn't left since he took his new task on. It was stressful for him. He essentially hadn't left since he took on this new task. It was stressful for him. He didn't believe he was entirely worthy of being a master and spent 3 whole days inside the archives, only leaving for 30-minute increments. You could see the bags under his eyes and the tension in his shoulders just from 3 days. It didn't help that his master's funeral was 3 days before. Depa took a seat next to Obi-Wan and asked him how he was holding up. He was alright. No one really paid him any mind when he got back. He felt forgotten and unseen. Maybe he was meant to endure such challenges, but it still hurt, especially in the moment. Depa leaned over and asked Obi-Wan to look her way. She looked into his eyes and saw how bloodshot they were. He looked fragile in a way. Putting her hand on his shoulder, she told him that she would be here to help him and aid him through this endeavor. She would be helping him teach Skywalker as a mentor to Obi-Wan, but teaching Skywalker the way she had previously with her own student, but with a Kenobi spin on it, of course. She continued by telling Obi-Wan that all the research he was killing himself over wasn't needed. She would just guide him herself. He couldn't phrase how much he appreciated the simple action. Depa was already an established master, and having her by his side would only help bring Anakin into what he was destined to become, according to Qui-Gon, that is. Depa would spend time with Kenobi, giving him simple instruction before she would find herself with the younglings and with Anakin Skywalker himself. He looked different than the bowl-cut hair boy she saw before. That Anakin carried sand on his shoes and a demeanor of coldness. This Anakin was fit to be a Jedi, and yet there was still a layer of coldness surrounding him. It was a piece of the dark side, but it didn't necessarily mean that Anakin was bad by any means. Depa recognized this and realized that Anakin shouldn't be placed into the typical youngling classes. They would only immobilize his growth and foster a growth towards the darkness within him. Depa informed the instructors that she would be taking Skywalker out of their classes indefinitely. They were questioning this move by Depa, but she silenced it by raising her hand. It was in Depa's strength to be as such. She didn't need a big voice, but her presence alone carried a demeanor of someone who deserved respect, someone who without asking or seeking it received it. She learned that from Master Windu, of course. Depa took Skywalker by the shoulder and walked with him away from the youngling hall and introduced herself. Anakin remembered her face but didn't say much of anything. In only 3 days, he'd changed just enough. It was obvious too. When he first arrived, he was much more sociable. Now it seemed as if speaking to others rose anxiety within him. She didn't want that for Anakin, so keeping him away from the other students would likely be best for him. Depa took Anakin to a quiet place inside of the temple. It was a meditation chamber. It was very similar to the temple garden, but it was typically a lot more secluded and less filled with people. And Depa knew about it, which is why she brought Skywalker here. The two of them sat down. Depa just wanted to get a feel for Anakin. She expressed her purpose and what she would be doing for him throughout the duration of their time together. Anakin was genuinely appreciative, even though he didn't entirely understand it. Why would a council member wish to assist him? Depa told him that Obi-Wan was for it, and she painted Obi-Wan in the best light that she could. She wanted Anakin to feel as if this was a team around him. She also made it very clear that this was by her own choice, and no one forced it onto her. Anakin appreciated that, especially the honesty. There was something about Depa that was very comforting, maternal if you will, probably the kindest person that he encountered during his short stint inside the Jedi Temple. Anakin appreciated her comfort and believed that she did mean well. It could be seen as naive considering he had no real reason to assume the Jedi would mistreat him, but maybe it was naive? For a while, Depa and Anakin would sit in the meditation chambers. Jedi would come and go, but it was a wonderful area. The sound in the chambers didn't carry. Every voice sounded distant, but it was distorted by the echo of the chamber, so nothing could be heard by anyone else. It was simply a hum. It was a little eerie for Anakin, but for everyone else, it was typical, normal if you will. Depa explained what she would do with Anakin and Kenobi, her intentions, and she laid them out in the entire plan she had for him. She and Obi-Wan would work closely with him for the first 2 or 3 years, and slowly she'd begin to let Obi-Wan take over the mantle of being Anakin's true master. Anakin was curious as to why this was, or why Obi-Wan wasn't taking the mantle immediately. Depa explained it as Obi-Wan made a promise he was not yet ready to fulfill. Obi-Wan wanted to be everything Anakin needed, but it was far too much for a young Jedi to handle as such. Anakin asked her what would happen if he formed a better bond with her than Kenobi. She told Anakin that they would cross that bridge if they got to it, but at the moment, she was focused on his training. Depa made this communication with Anakin open and accessible. She wanted him to feel free to say anything he wanted to, and what he needed to get out of his chest. So, when she was finished explaining everything to him, she asked if he had any questions, and he had one very important question. what happened to his mother. Depa was unsure. She asked Anakin what he'd last known about her whereabouts. Depa was very unsure. The council hadn't mentioned anything, and neither had Obi-Wan. She just naturally assumed that it was all taken care of by Qui-Gon, but it turns out it wasn't. It slipped Obi-Wan's mind because he was studying for how to become a Jedi Master. When Depa learned of everything, she dispatched Obi-Wan to Tatooine to free Shmi Skywalker, and then she requested that he begin setting up an operation to get Jedi into the Outer Rim and begin freeing the slaves. Obi-Wan didn't really know how to approach this, so she sternly, not rudely or angrily, said that Obi-Wan was a Jedi Master now. He simply needed to do what he felt was right. No one would do it for him. He was able to set things up and order Jedi into positions he believed were necessary. He was worthy of it. He just needed to start believing that he was worthy of it. Being a Jedi Master wasn't just a title, it was a responsibility. If Obi-Wan felt like something needed to be done, he could order temple guards or knights to the scene or request other masters to join him. He could set the boundaries. It was all up to him. Obi-Wan was sent to Tatooine while Depa and Skywalker began their training. It was the basics, understanding the Force and understanding how to use it. Depa didn't put a cap on Skywalker and allowed him to naturally develop. Because she was working with him one-on-one, she was able to notice habits or traits he was using and then stopping them before they developed into something toxic. These would be little touches of the dark side. They wouldn't be noticeable to an inexperienced master like Kenobi, but Depa was able to pick up on them immediately, quickly putting them to an end before they could get too out of hand. The way she conducted herself with Anakin made him feel listened to and understood. Depa felt like a mother. Jedi weren't supposed to be mothers or fathers, but that's the essence she emanated. She gave him a feeling of comfort, and to him, that was everything. That was exactly what he needed. On Tatooine, Obi-Wan was able to free Shmi Skywalker, and with Depa's permission, Shmi was able to talk to her boy, all the way on the other side of the galaxy. Depa didn't believe it to be negative for Anakin to interact with his very own mother. His training needed to be handled differently, and it was, thanks to Depa. Obi-Wan, after freeing Shmi, learned about a chain of slavery that extended around the Outer Rim. He knew he promised Qui-Gon to train Anakin, but it was being fulfilled by Depa. Instead, Obi-Wan needed to be here. Having been on the ship the entire time when they were last on Tatooine, he didn't see how bad it was. Kenobi contacted the Temple Battle Master Sindralik and asked for the Jedi to send some reinforcements to the planet of Tatooine. Sindralik wanted an exact number by Kenobi, and he suggested a couple hundred. To Master Sindralik, that was far too much. His temple force was 500 max consistently, so he couldn't split up half of that, maybe a fifth, but he needed to see what Obi-Wan was seeing before he could delegate such a force to the Outer Rim. Within weeks after Sindralik visited the Outer Rim, the Jedi would migrate 360 Jedi to the Outer Rim, and a small outpost would be bought and built on Tatooine inside of Mos Espa. The Hutts did not like that one bit. They were quickly threatened by the appearance of the Jedi, and they warned the Zygerians, whose entire business was run on slavery. Sindralik would appoint a Paul-Un temple guard to assist Kenobi with the operations, and another Jedi Master would be present, considering he was already out in the Outer Rim, that one being Quinlan Vos. There was obviously more Masters, but Sindralik, after seeing Obi-Wan's quick action, believed he would suit himself well out here in the Outer Rim. The Jedi would be quiet for the most part. Their operations were mostly stealthy. The people on Tatooine only recognized the Jedi because when their loved ones came home after being enslaved, they were told that they were saved by the Jedi. It was a rising of inspiration, and the crime families hated it, especially the Hutts, and their most powerful member, Jabba. Something had to be done about these Jedi. The council would be informed by Depa that Skywalker's training was going accordingly, and that she'd heard from Obi-Wan that the situation was getting more intense in the Outer Rim. The council didn't like that too much. They tried maintaining the status quo, and while they approved of Obi-Wan's actions to free the slaves, they didn't like the idea of starting an engagement with the crime lords of the Outer Rim. As they soon learned, they had no other choice. Master Yarael Poof and new council member Coleman Trebor would be sent to Tatooine. Coleman had recently just replaced Master Yaddle on the High Council. The two council members would bring an additional 500 Jedi to the Outer Rim, increasing their number of troops to 860 total Jedi. There were others spread out on individual missions, but the total number of Jedi here in the Outer Rim for Kenobi's operation was 860. Within months of their stay, the crime lords picked a fight with the Jedi in the streets of Mos Espa. Pirates and bounty hunters were sent in, and it was a slaughter. Only 3 Jedi fell for the dozens upon dozens of hired hands that were killed by the Jedi. Jedi. The brawl sparked galactic attention, which led to a chain of events that resulted in huge backlash against the Chancellor. The people saw the Jedi being heroes, fighting insurgents in the streets of a scummy world. The Jedi were obviously there to help, and the news headlines reported 3 Jedi killed trying to end slavery, or others wrote 3 heroes died in the name of freedom. The typical cliche type of rhetoric when someone does something expected from them. Though shortly after the conversations about priding the Jedi came to an end, the conversation drifted to why hasn't the Supreme Chancellor Palpatine done anything? So headlines followed out shortly after that, sprouting Chancellor Palpatine doesn't care for the Outer Rim, and Palpatine supports Outer Rim slavery. It was a tirade of what you'd expect, but it wasn't inaccurate in both accounts. Palpatine was negligent to the problems of the Outer Rim intentionally, he just never thought the corrupt Jedi would go out of their way to assist the people in the Outer Rim. This backlash left Palpatine scrambling to send people to the Outer Rim, but the damage was already done. The Jedi quickly acted on it. Windu, seeing 3 Jedi dead, dispatched himself along with another 700 Jedi to the Outer Rim. They were going to shut it all down, which had even more trouble for Palpatine in the water. The Crime Lords ran everything in the Outer Rim, and while it was something Palpatine had simply inherited from decades of neglect in the Outer Rim, he was going to be the one to pay for it. The Jedi, for the first time since the High Republic, worked together on a strike against a specific group. It was a very targeted attack on the Hutts and the Zygerians, but as the Jedi got more entranced in what they were doing, they found out that the Pikes and the Black Sun also had power out here in the Outer Rim. It would take years, but the Jedi would dismantle the entire system. It would have a boatload of effects on the galaxy. The war with the pirates and the crime families would have numerous bounty hunters dead, notable names being Jango Fett, Aurra Sing, Dengar, Bossk, Black Chrysanthemum, and Cad Bane. Of course, with so much skill, Jedi were killed too. This wasn't exactly something the Jedi wanted to be involved in, but once it started, they couldn't back out. Windu led the Jedi in, and not every Jedi left. While Depa spent most of the time training her new student, Jedi Council members Even Peel, Coleman Trebor, Adi Gallia, Eth Koth, and Ki-Adi-Mundi were killed during the conflict. This conflict also forced Oppo Rancisis to step down from his seat on the High Council. Other notable Jedi who died during this conflict were Pong Krell, Ima Gun-Di, and Aayla Secura. This conflict wasn't easy to deal with, and the public, unlike any other time in history, followed the events nightly for 3 whole years. Every night new reports would pile in. Destruction of Jabba's palace in the first year, the capture of Zero the Hutt on Coruscant, and Jabba's demise the following week. Notable bounty hunters killed in the clash with the Jedi. 4 Jedi killed, 1 council member dead. It ate away at the tabloids, and it ended up with the Republic voicing calls on a vote of no confidence by the man who lost to Palpatine in the election, Bail Antilles. He was stepping down from the Senate and figured he'd do some good while he was at it. Antilles was being replaced by Organa at the moment, and he figured that a vote of no confidence would get Palpatine out of office. The irony is that the public now had a higher disdain for Palpatine than they did Valorum before he was thrown from office. The tides had turned, and the Jedi didn't realize what Kenobi had accidentally stumbled upon. In 3 years, the Hutts crumbled, the Zygerian Empire fell again to the Jedi, and all that remained was a coalition between the Black Sun and the Pike Syndicate. At this point, a young senator from Onderon who had befriended the young senator from Naboo would be thrusted into power. Mina Bontiri had a way with words, and the Republic hoped that by installing a voice from the Mid-Rim, they could quell sparks of rebellion and insurgency around the galaxy. It's something the Jedi had neglected, being that in the wake of a war with the pirates, they didn't necessarily care about people calling for the disruption and dissolution of the Republic. Mina Bontiri would represent these voices, and she would be ushered in office of the Supreme Chancellor. She would keep Masameda along by her side for a few short months before realizing he was only in it to make her life more difficult. Mina's voice would ring out aid to the Jedi, and the Republic would begin to descend into the Mid and Outer Rim with full aid, taking money away from the core and supplying the people that needed it most. It was done first with a budget cut on the Senator's payroll, which was a significant amount. The Jedi received aid, and then with it, the Black Sun and the Pike Syndicate were thrust into prisons across the galaxy, and their former mighty empires crumbled to the hands of wizards. While Obi-Wan was away from the temple on the side quest of a lifetime, Anakin and Depa had progressed through their training. Depa helped Skywalker with all the basics. She guided Anakin to Ilum, where he crafted his first lightsaber, and she ensured he stayed distant from the politicians, especially the Chancellor, who had been requesting to meet Anakin, that was Palpatine. With Palpatine out of office, that didn't matter, but Depa would not risk it. Anakin, with Depa, was able to progress relatively quickly. This is because she didn't put a limit on him. She allowed him to grow within reason. Depa didn't stop Anakin from doing anything aside from using the dark side of the Force. This was his only issue. She would teach a lesson. He would understand, and immediately he would rely on the dark side. This would have the two of them back in the meditation investigation chambers, going over different versions of the same lesson. Don't focus on the future, it isn't here yet. It's all about the journey, not the finish line. What you seek won't come any faster if you try and force it. It was a bit repetitive, but the cycle needed to be continued until Skywalker understood that what he was doing wasn't healthy for him or his Jedi training. There was nothing negative about using the dark side. Depa, of course, would know that, being Windu's student. However, how Anakin was utilizing it was beyond what Windu and Depa considered acceptable behavior for a Jedi. Depa did everything within her power to make it more understandable for Anakin, and it did become more understandable after time. Skywalker took up Form 7 after his master, which was also something Windu used. While Depa couldn't consult Windu on teaching Skywalker due to his absence from the temple and his focus in the Outer Rim, she did come to the conclusion which inevitably worked for Anakin. It was a balance between Vapad and what Anakin used. It was a tad bit complex for his age, but he was able to understand it rather easily, surprisingly. It was that he could use the dark side, but he could not be controlled by it. Sounds simple on paper, but for someone as powerful as Skywalker, it could be very deadly. When Kenobi returned from the battlefront with the Jedi outpost becoming a permanent residence on Tatooine and Quinlan Vos becoming the overseer of said outpost, Kenobi was able to come back to the temple. He saw that Anakin had developed really far in the 3 years since he had last saw him. A lot had to do with Depa's persistence and her patience, but a good portion also came from the bond that Depa and Anakin had. Obi-Wan and Anakin didn't quite have that connection, likely because Anakin saw Obi-Wan almost as an equal. It didn't mean he didn't respect Kenobi, rather he just saw Obi-Wan as someone who was also learning rather than just being a teacher already. For Depa, she was already established. She had the confidence and swagger of a Jedi Master, similar to that of Qui-Gon, in Anakin's mind at least, and he respected her for it and he looked up to her. He was able to get guidance from her, and that would be as much as he needed. Kenobi felt nothing bad about not being able to be a part of Skywalker's training. It actually relieved him when he returned as Master Kenobi without having to actually put much effort into being a Jedi Master, aside from what he did in the Outer Rim. Obi-Wan did make sure that Anakin knew if he needed anything, he'd be around for him. After all, Anakin was extremely thankful for Kenobi. Obi-Wan didn't just free Shmi, but he also contributed to the effort to free slaves around the entire galaxy and start a rebuilding process in the Outer Rim. Obi-Wan hadn't heard about it, but before he arrived on Coruscant, Supreme Chancellor Mina Bontiri passed a bipartisan bill that would send relief and supplies to the Outer Rim worlds. It was trillions of credits worth of supplies, relief, and work. Prisoners across the galaxy would be enlisted in it. Republic marshals would be sent in to quell any rambunctious individuals, and the Corps would do what it should have been doing the entire time, supporting the growth in the Outer Rim. Regardless of how long ago it should have been started, it was finally started now. This did leave a target on Mina's head, especially from the Count of Sereno, who was doing everything in his power to melt up a disdain for the current Supreme Chancellor. This didn't bode well for Dooku. His homeworld of Sereno was doing better because of Bontiri, and they didn't very much so like him siding with Chancellor Palpatine. The Jedi didn't keep up tabloids, but Yoda kept his tabs on his former student, and when he learned of the bond that was clearly existent between Dooku and Palpatine, he found this to be rather odd, so he enlisted a good friend of his to take an investigation into it. Master Terra Sanube was up for the challenge, so he went in. At the moment, Castle Sereno was being taken over by the population, and Count Dooku was ostracized by his own people. They didn't like Palpatine, and even though Dooku never specifically said anything to support Palpatine, the way he went after Mina in comparison made people lose their trust for him and his estate. Terra Sanube would follow Dooku around for the longer part of 4 months. It was a tedious task for the old Jedi, but he was one of the best. During this period, Obi-Wan and Anakin would develop their relationship more, Anakin gaining much more respect for Master Kenobi through Obi-Wan's tellings of his heroics during the Jedi Hutt War, as they were currently calling it. Surely the name would change, but in this galaxy everything had to be called a war. Depa, seeing the growth between Obi-Wan and Anakin, began to back out a little bit, still overseeing most of the training but giving the two of them as much time as they needed to naturally develop their bond with each other without her having to keep the two of them together. She feared this, and she feared that she'd have to be present for the entire bonding process, but it turned out all it took were some really cool war stories to get Skywalker to become enamored with you. Of course, that wasn't the only thing. Obi-Wan took Anakin on a trip to Tatooine to show him something really cool. The Republic had paid for and rebuilt the course for the Boonta Eve Classic, making it the shining jewel in the desert. The entire planet had changed since the Jedi intervention. Of course, during his trip, Anakin got to visit his mother, but he was in awe of what had been done in the Outer Rim. One might ask, why would the Republic fund the construction of a raceway? And the answer was simple. Much like Canto Bight, Tatooine would build an economy of its own off of gambling. It by no means was a perfect system, but it would be necessary to get Tatooine off the ground in self-sustain. Of course, there are many downsides to building an economy off of gambling, but it was one of the only places in the galaxy that could only do that. With nothing else attracting people to Tatooine, the races in the Boonta Eve Classic, now being hosted by the mayor of Mos Espa, would be that attraction, hopefully. Anakin was a little jealous. He wished the course looked as clean as it did now when he first raced on it. But in all seriousness, he was happy in his own way that the people of Tatooine had a chance for revival. When the two of them returned to Coruscant, they learned that the Council sent 3 of its best away. Tara Sinube had seemingly discovered the whereabouts of a potential Sith ally, and it led them to the works on Coruscant. Inside of the industrial sector, Yoda, Windu, and Plo Koon entered a facility. The 3 of them walked quietly, searching for Master Tara Sinube, until they heard his old voice cry out and the sound of a lightsaber igniting. The 3 Jedi ran around the corner to see a hooded man in front of Dooku with his lightsaber sticking through Sinube's chest. Yoda, Mace, and Plo ignited their weapons. Sidious and Dooku were surprised that the Jedi had found them, but he had no doubt in his mind that these Jedi wouldn't be worth his time. Just like Tara, they would gut them. Dooku ignited his own weapon and Sidious ignited his second blade. The 5 duelists clashed, Dooku and Windu engaging on one hand as Plo and Yoda took on Sidious. Typically, Yoda would have preferred the idea of fighting the Avatar of Darkness by himself, but with Plo, he felt confident. Yoda didn't want to worry about his ally dying in his duel, but with someone like Plo Koon dueling, he wasn't to worry. Plo was one of the 2 duelists he trusted in this situation to go toe-to-toe with the Sith Lord. Plo and Yoda use each other to take the fight to Sidious. Plo, having used Yoda's form to best him in a spar once, used the same strategy here. He had a natural advantage being that Kel Dor were naturally stronger than humans, but that didn't go to his head. He just remained steadfast in the moment, without bending or breaking. Yoda, on the other hand, moved like a blur. He and Sidious were quicker than the eye could blink. Sidious found himself more entwined with his duel with Yoda than being able to think about Plo being here, which led Plo to catching him off guard multiple times. However, Sidious was no fool. He wasn't weak either. He was able to defend himself adequately each time. Windu and Dooku, on the other hand, were former friends. They knew each other's styles, and so Dooku avoided using the dark side, putting him into an advantageous position. He knew that he was a better duelist than Windu, but if he used the dark side, then Windu would be able to use his skills to best him, so instead, he avoided the dark side. He used all of his natural talents against those of Windu's. This had Mace backpedaling in a quick defense, keeping pace but almost faltering. Dooku's curved blade allowed for more aerodynamic speed, faster than Windu could ever muster. Their blades clashed again and again. On the other side of the room, Yoda was lifted from his feet by a parry that had him thrown to the other side of the room. Plo and Sidious got into a tight exchange, Plo moving his blade steadily with Sidious, switching into defense knowing that what Sidious was doing would be more draining than what he was doing. Plo could hold a defensive fight longer than Sidious could hold an offensive fight, and that's all he needed to do. The 2 masters of the respective arts battled back and forth, their blades smashing into the other, sending echoes throughout the Sith layer. Plo heard Windu from across the room stammer, and as he slid around avoiding a strike from Sidious, he stretched out his arm, and surprising even himself, yellow electricity fled from his fingers, some of it covering Dooku's back while the rest found his home on Sidious's blades. Plo didn't know what he just did, but he knew it wasn't created by anger. It was electric judgment, and he never used it before. Plo re-engaged with Sidious just as Yoda was jumping back to his feet. The electric judgment by Plo bought Windu more time, and he used it to perfection, striking down Dooku with his perfect swing. It wasn't intentional, nor was it the Jedi way, but it would spare Windu from having to make another difficult choice revolving around his former friend. Mace looked over and saw the 2 Jedi crushing their blades against Sidious. The Dark Lord threw Plo from his feet with the Force, and as he did, Yoda recoiled, losing his focus for the first time in the duel, leaving him defenseless. As Sidious slid his blade into the Grandmaster's chest, Windu cried out, leaping across the room and engaging Sidious. The Dark Lord used his second blade to defend himself, pulling his other blade out of Yoda's carcass. Plo got to his feet and ran to aid Windu, the 2 Jedi pushing harder and faster. Windu was able to use Vapad, and it worked to perfection. Sidious's speed, agility, talents, and ferocity were no match for Mace's mastery of harmony in the Force. Plo and Windu swiftly cut down the Sith Lord, and a dark aura in the galaxy was lifted. It was like a daytime fog, hardly noticeable but present enough to notice. The Jedi picked up on it, but never assumed much about it. With the Sith dead, they realized how much power Sidious and Dooku were combined on the Force. The Grand Master would be laid to rest. With the Sith extinguished, Plo would rise to become the newest Grand Master of the Jedi Order. While the Sith were dead, it didn't mean that the training of Skywalker would get any easier. He still had a lot of issues, but he wasn't being manipulated by an older friend, which allowed him to develop really well. Depa oversaw his training and growth but didn't interject unless absolutely needed. Obi-Wan and Anakin's master and apprentice bond became the highlight of the Jedi Order. Through his bond with Depa and Obi-Wan, he naturally lost interest in having a love connection. He had his mother to talk to, and he had two teachers that fulfilled his needs by simply being who they were in his own life. From time to time, he would see Padme and his heart would flutter, but he was mature enough to handle his emotions and say to himself, "Yeah, she's cute, but I prefer what it is that I have, which is myself." Anakin became a knight at 18, and he would become free to choose his own path. It would be challenging for Anakin, but he would move himself to the Outer Rim, Tatooine outpost, and spend time with Master Quinlan Vos and the other Jedi currently out there. It gave him time to be close with his mother again, and do good for the people who started out in an unfavorable situation. He really enjoyed the lifestyle he was able to capture for himself. His former teachers, Depa and Kenobi, would find themselves on the Council, joining the new Grand Master as he tried to pick up some of the pieces he believed that Yoda failed at, which would have a new outpost opening in the northern part of the galaxy. Depa would be placed in charge of it, willingly, and a grouping of 1,300 Jedi would go with her, willingly, of course. The Jedi would spread out far and wide so that they could be positive as an influence on the galaxy around them. Obi-Wan, now a council member, would take on a second student in Ahsoka Tano, which would be a tough student, but nothing he couldn't handle. Inside of the Republic, Chancellor Mina Bontiri would continue to rally support, and she would secure herself a second term inside the Galactic Senate. While this was positive, the beginning movements of what Dooku started would flare up over time, though it was nothing super negative. The Separatists weren't formed enough or confident enough to challenge the Republic, which would lead to a couple of blockades and skirmishes. Nothing too drastic, but enough to levy massive taxes on the corporate alliance. These ramifications would have the Republic collectively tearing them apart for the betterment of the people in the galaxy. This would also flare up issues on Kamino. The Kaminoans would reach out to the Republic about a payment from Lord Tyrannus. However, the Republic would charge Dooku's estate, ruining his entire estate and family legacy and paying off the Kaminoans for a clone army that they didn't want. The clones were not fully formed, and the Kaminoans, being the Kaminoans, would put them down. The Jedi had no involvement in any of this. The only thing they had any involvement is with providing relief to the planets that were in the skirmishes or the blockades. They never learned about the clones on Kamino. Nothing was done by the corporate alliances to the extent of which Naboo's blockade was years prior, but the message was sent to the Republic, and the corporate alliance paid for it, their leaders all being thrown into maximum security prisons with the survivors of the Jedi Hutt War. The droids of the corporate alliance would have their processors replaced, and they'd become worker droids in the Outer Rim. When Mina's term expired, she selectively chose to step down when it was clear her friend, ally, and part-time agree-to-disagree colleague Padme Amidala would be the favorite to win the coming election. This would have the Republic in good hands for another couple of years. For Anakin, he would eventually return to Coruscant after helping the planets affected by the corporate alliance's greed. When he returned, he would join his former master, Obi-Wan, and decide that he too wanted an apprentice, taking on a young Twi'lek student in Deja Numa, and going from Coruscant to Tatooine in the northern part of the galaxy to join Master Depa Billaba and her outpost. Skywalker's time teaching Deja would be as pleasant as he could have ever imagined, eventually becoming a Jedi Master himself. After training Deja, he would spend more time around council members, most specifically Depa, Mace, and Obi-Wan. He wanted to learn about Depa's and Mace's ability to use the dark side of the Force in a Jedi way, which inevitably he did. Before completing that training, he took on another student. Her name was Reva. Anakin's enjoyment of teaching would have him propose to the council that once he was finished with his training of Reva, he would start a Jedi Academy where he could instruct multiple students at once, but he was left with two choices. Windu had fallen ill, and Anakin was being passed the mantle. He could either start an academy, or he could become the master of the Jedi Order. Both were tempting, being as he was about to become a council member anyways, but Anakin suggested that Obi-Wan Kenobi become the master of the Order, which was accepted by Plo and the rest of the council, and Anakin was given permission to start an academy when he finished Reva's training. It would take a couple of years, but she, like Deja, excelled with a teacher like Skywalker. When all was said and done, he created an academy on Ossus, where he would train a number of students at the same time. He relished in the teaching process. Of course he did. He was a natural instructor. This led him to being joined by Shakti, and eventually after her, Kit Fisto and Kelleran Beck, who brought with him Grogu. Grandmaster Plo would visit both outposts and Anakin's academy. He would naturally live past Skywalker's life, but he would ensure that the legacy of Skywalker would be remembered forever. The academy on Ossus, or what they now called the Skywalker Academy for Aspiring Jedi, would be considered the most prestigious leg of the Jedi Order. The growth of the Jedi was inspired by Kenobi's outreach in the Outer Rim, but led forward by the innovative minds inside the Jedi Order. With the Republic growing out of its corruption and inspired by a new resurgence in the Jedi Order, the future without the Sith looked brighter than that of the High Republic. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Gallivant Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Jack Miller, Mad Matter Studios, Flynn Vassis, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the man with 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button if you want to support the channel. Check out the Patreon. The links are all down below. Let's talk about our lovely story. This one was a lot of fun. Now, we've done probably 20 what if Anakin was trained by a different Jedi Master, and this one is probably my favorite. Now, I personally would really like to redo a couple of them, like specifically like the Plo Koon one. Plo Koon is one of my favorite Jedi, so I would like to redo that one. But that's besides the point. This one was awesome. I'm gonna be honest with you, I feel really positively about this one. This was a lot of fun. The twists in this were super dope in my opinion. To have Obi-Wan in the Outer Rim, have a Jedi Hutts like Civil War kind of thing go on, it was a lot of fun. It brought a whole new dynamic to what if blank taught Anakin, and I really enjoyed the new dynamic. The ending for this is one of my favorites in a new story. This is probably one of my newer favorite stories that I've done lately, and I think the entire arc of the story was something that was unexpected. I always shoot to make something new, and I think this one accomplished that, which is something really hard to do when you do 20 like the same kind of concept videos. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, smash the like button. If you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon. Otherwise, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.